Well, then, of course, the V-2 group ran into unforeseen problems with break-up before striking the target.
Yes, what happened was that up to the first successful flight of the V-2, we really never had any high-level support for the V-2 program because the thought was widespread, and Hitler himself felt that way about it, that this would be impossible to build a thing like the V-2, and so we really didn't get full support. Now, after we demonstrated that the thing did work, the official position from upstairs changed 180 degrees, and all of a sudden we were directed to go into mass production, for which we were not ready either.
Yeah.
Because there were many, many problems still to be solved. But this created an entirely new set of difficulties. And the V-2 then was put in mass production, immature as it was, and when we finally made evaluation tests with the field troops who were to fire it and employ it operationally, we found out, to our great disappointment, that about 70% of these V-2s disintegrated before they hit the ground. We hadn't discovered that at Peenemünde because we had always impacted on water.
I was just going to say, they may have done this earlier too, but you always were shooting out roughly parallel to the coastline, and
yes,
the impact was in water and nobody around to watch it.
We saw a green spot there, and we're always delighted when it was close to the target. But there was no evidence available about any premature breakups.
Yeah.
And only when the operational testing, which was combined with field training of the operational firing units, was conducted in eastern Poland, and they put some evaluation groups there into the Pripyat swamps.
Yes,
and in eastern Poland, they discovered that many of these missiles broke up prematurely. It was that I got a telegram one fine day that this observation had been made, that 70% broke up prematurely, and what we planned to do about it, because the production line was going full blast already. And at that point, we simply resolved, let's go in there into the target area and let's let ourselves get shot at so that we could observe these things on the way down to see what happened and evaluate the debris.
Yeah.
And I lived there for about 2 weeks, and we got shot at a rate of about 10 a day, always live warheads for that matter. So I can really say I know the V-2 not only from the delivering end, but quite intimately also from the receiving end.
You know it from both ends. Which was your closest miss?
300 feet.
300 feet.
It really was pretty close.
Close enough for anybody.
We had a joke in those days that the purpose of the exercise with these missiles was to make the target more dangerous than the launching site. Now, many mishaps, of course, happened in the launching site also, and I think the argument was never quite settled as to whether the V-2 ever got to the point where the target was really more dangerous than the launching site.
Well, no, you couldn't expect this with the first one. Now, all this then ended in, as far as you are concerned, when were the first operational shots? In September?
That was in September 1944.
44. September 1944.
Yes.
And then you left Peenemünde when?
In January 1945, the war situation had developed to a point where the Russian armies had already crossed the Vistula River and were in the eastern part of Pomerania, and at night we could already hear the guns. About 100 miles away or so. Yeah. And at that point, it was pretty evident that if we wanted to get out there before the Russian armies moved in, we had to move fast. We were under very conflicting orders at that time from all kinds of agencies in Germany as to what to do. For example, the local authorities said, you stay here and defend the Pomeranian soil. They didn't tell us with what, because we had no arms. The munitions department in Berlin told us to move out. Other people wanted us to stay put and continue development because the Russians would be reversed very shortly. So we really could take our pick.
You could take the order that happened to fit in with your personal preference.
What I actually did was I assembled my department heads and simply put the question to a vote. And we voted unanimously to move out before it was too late. and try to move towards the west in the direction of where the American army was moving in. Now, this was, of course, not quite easily accomplished because there was this rapidly deteriorating situation on the inner front, and all the roads were clogged with refugees and with supply vehicles for the fighting army units in the vicinity and so forth. And so we virtually bluffed our way through with flashing high priority move orders under the noses of the guards and so forth. But we finally managed to move about 5,000 people and 12,000 tons of equipment out of Peenemünde, with the heavy equipment mostly being evacuated over the waterway by means of ships
Yes.
to Lübeck. Now, about 2,000 tons of that equipment finally reached White Sands and was the hard core of our early V-2 test program.
Oh, of that Sands. Equipment, much of this still got to White Sands.
Yes, yes.
But you personally went to Bavaria.
Yes.
And
this, we were finally split up again when we arrived in central Germany, and part of us were sent down under orders to Bavaria because they didn't want us to be so close to the western front line now, but in the meantime the war ended, and finally we were captured by the American army practically 2 days after the hostilities had ended. We virtually surrendered. We came down from the hills and said, here we are, the war is over.
The next big event after Peenemünde is known as White Sands. White Sands had been selected here in the United States during the last year of the Second World War. But in the United States, only one rocket, which needed a proving ground of roughly that size, had been built, namely the WAC Corporal. And the WAC Corporal actually was the first rocket to be fired from the White Sands Proving Ground. But then the White Sands Proving Ground, being only 120 miles in its long direction, which is from north to south, rapidly became too small because now the V-2s and Wernher von Braun had moved in. You were at Fort Bliss then, weren't you, Wernher?
Yes. I arrived in White Sands in October 1945, and the first half year I actually lived at the White Sands Proving Ground proper. Only thereafter we moved to Fort Bliss, which is only about 50 miles away, and there's nothing in Texas.
No, of course not.
So it was commuting distance. Our first activity, when I say ours, I mean mine and that of the 120 associates from Peenemünde, I was permitted to bring along to the United States, was to fire V-2s in White Sands. The purpose of the exercise was twofold. One was that the Army wanted to know everything about the V-2 and simply wanted to evaluate the V-2 missile to learn all about it. The second was that these flights, which due to the limitations of the White Sand range had to be high-altitude flights, rather steep trajectories, were an ideal tool to do some high-altitude research. And so the United States Army invited a number of universities to participate in this effort to develop scientific payload packages that could be carried in the nose of V-2s to conduct measurements about the nature of the very high atmosphere.
Yes, I remember I saw number 14, which had been instrumented by Princeton University. Number 14, I don't know whether you recall the number offhand, unfortunately did not go to a high altitude, but put itself horizontal about 700 feet up and cruised over our heads.
Some of them did it.
Which was very spectacular, I must say. It didn't do any good, but it was a beautiful picture. Well, but then, after the V-2s were used up, I mean, the question then, which was discussed by everybody I know of, was should we, in the United States, build more V-2s or go on to something different? And I understand that you yourself voted in the direction of going on to something different.
Yes, the V-2, of course, by that time was an old workhorse, and it was certainly a good idea to start with a new concept and build an advanced missile, and rather than tooling up the V-2 for production again.
Yes, and
nevertheless, the V-2 itself, of course, helped a great deal, providing basic information for such advanced designs. For example, We built a two-stage vehicle consisting of a V-2 as the first stage and the Wreck Corporal as the second stage, which cracked the world altitude record in 1949 by reaching an altitude of 250 miles.
Yes, that was Project Bumper.
Yes.
Number 5 was the one that went to 250 miles, I think.
Yes, it wasn't the first bumper.
And it was
one
not
of
the first, it was number
right.
5.
Yes.
And then number 8 and 9, of course, have another historical significance. They were the first 2 missiles fired from Cape Canaveral.
That is right. They were fired into slanting trajectories. The purpose of these 2 flights was not to go after high altitudes, but to measure heat transfer at very high speeds when these vehicles, the second stage in particular, traveled through the atmosphere.
Yes.
And they produced some very valuable data, too. I would say, by and large, this whole V-2 program in the United States was very gratifying for me because in Germany, the V-2, for all its potential as a scientific vehicle carrier, was, of course, used as a weapon only, the country being at war. And this period in the United States, where a total of, I think, over 60 V-2s were fired, gave the V-2 a chance of serving as a valuable scientific tool also, which had always been pretty close to our heart all these years, but we never had a chance of...
Now some research could be done with the thing.
Precisely.
And something fundamental could be learned.
Yes.